that the most important thing we can do is give. We are given much so that we can give to others. When the Korean War broke out, my father was very concerned for the people he'd met. And he was reading the stories about how the war was coming in and impacting people. His concern was that Americans didn't know how the Korean people were suffering. So he came back to Korea the only way he could. He couldn't come back as an evangelist. So he got his correspondence credentials. He began flying with the military, using his movie camera to capture all of this heartbreaking scene. Refugees coming over the last bridge from the north to Seoul. And he would take his camera right into the face of a mother holding her dying child in her arms, children with naked little bellies and toothpick arms and legs. But you cannot do that over and over and over without your own heart. When you see a lot of suffering, it's easy to harden your heart, not see the suffering. It becomes your job. And my father wanted to make sure that his heart never got hard. And one day, after watching children freezing to death in the cold Korean winter, he fell on his knees and he cried out to God, "Let my heart be broken." It's easy to go on the internet and look at the news. It's easy to see the suffering of this world. Then we go off to our own lives and we forget what we have seen. But if our hearts are really broken, we can't do that. We have to do something about it. And so then he went out and he began to find ways to make a difference. The wonderful thing about compassion. When two people with a heart of compassion meet, they recognize that same heart in one another. And when my father met Dr. Han, he recognized that same heart of compassion. And they were very creative. Dr. Han was the hands and feet here in Korea to make things happen. My father would go back to the United States and Canada and would tell stories through his movies and encourage people to help and raise the funds. My father was one of the greatest fundraisers of his time. People say, if you're going to go hear Bob Pierce preach, leave your wallet at home. Because you couldn't help but give. In fact, would even take their rings off and just put them in the offering plate because he would inspire people to want to give. World Vision Korea became an actual nonprofit in 1950. Dad began to raise funds in the United States to fund, and these amazing orphanages and refugee centers, providing for the many widows. They had to raise children on their own, and often they couldn't feed them. So World Vision would provide a World Vision children's home where women could bring their children so they wouldn't starve to death. They needed to learn how to provide for themselves. My mother, Lorraine Pierce, actually went out and fundraised so that we could provide sewing machines for women to learn to sew. At first they sewed military uniforms, and then after the war they sewed school uniforms and clothing and become independent. You know, World Vision's desire has always been to provide ways for people to provide for themselves. And so Korea is a wonderful example of how people took responsibility for their own futures, and they learned how to do something that was meaningful, and that's the way it is for World Vision today. We have staff all over the world who are the hands and feet on the ground, making the work happen, and then you have those of us in World Vision Korea and World Vision US and around the world who are sharing the need and asking people to give. It is still a perfect combination.